It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and John Daigle.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eating Podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eating Podcast presented, of course, as always, by DraftKings. DraftKings, the crown is yours. Very excited for today's show because it's our Super Bowl prop bet recap. For those of you that are loyal listeners or viewers, youtube.com/Ross Tucker NFL, you know that we systematically went through basically every prop bet, the standard ones, right? Rushing, receiving, attempts, yards, all those things for both the Eagles and the Chiefs over the course of the last couple weeks. We got to kind of see how we did with what we thought was going to happen and then what actually happened. Although it should be noted, nobody actually thought that's how that game was going to go. No, not a single person said 34-0 or 40-6 with 2 minutes left. No, not a real thing that anybody actually thought would happen. But I want to get into these Super Bowl prop bets with my guy John Daigle and just hear how things unfolded, which ones hit, which ones didn't, what John got right, what John got wrong. John is a superstar from EstablishTheRun.com. I have no idea how he gets all this information and then is able to very eloquently, I might add, disseminate that information on this show. It's greatly appreciated. Check him out on social media at NotJDaigle. If you're not, you're missing out. And also, if you don't subscribe to EstablishTheRun.com, you're probably not going to win your league. I'm just telling you. Or even be as successful as you could from a betting perspective. Use the code FEAST so that they know I sent you. EstablishTheRun.com, code FEAST, so that they know I sent you. All right, John, did I even mention that my name is Ross Tucker? I think you know that. At Ross Tucker NFL on social media. You can follow us at Ross Tucker Pod. All right, John, let's go through it. I don't know how you want to go through it, but however you want to go through the prop bets, I'm curious. It's funny because the one thing I remember is you saying that the Chiefs' run defense had been struggling at the wrong time. That might have been the only thing that went well for them in this game, John, was their run. Although, you know what? That's not true because Hurts tore him up. We were all over the over yardage on Hurts.
Over yardage and the props I hammered home for everyone the past couple of weeks since we did 2 episodes, how the Chiefs could win and how the Eagles could win. I spoke about 8 props in particular, and we went 5-8. But together, we all won.
5-3?
5-3. I'm sorry, 5-3.
Yep.
So we went 5 out of 8. But we all won mini units together because the big one we talked about that producer Jack even cut up for us on social media was Jalen Hurts' first touchdown of the game at plus 650. And we saw when Jahan Dotson got tackled at the 1-yard line, everyone in the world knew what the next play was. And that, of course, is lining up for the tush push, trying to draw everyone off sides, and it's Hurts who gets in for that first touchdown of the game. It is funny you mentioned Saquon Barkley and Steve Spagnuolo and the Chiefs' run defense overcompensating for Barkley. And that's why they limited him to a long run of 10 yards. One of the losing bets I discussed was, at the time, it hadn't opened when we did that last Wednesday episode while we were at Radio Row before the Super Bowl. But I did speak about Saquon Barkley perhaps struggling to reach his ceiling in this game, but still confident in busting at least one long one for a longest rush. Afterwards, after that show, DraftKings opened his longest run at 26.5 yards. Again, did not come close because Spagnuolo's unit overcompensated and held him to a long run of 10 yards. But Jalen Hurts, as you mentioned, the one we talked about, both over rushing yards, 37.5, and of course that first touchdown at plus 650, both of those get there. And the way they played Barkley, I think, is the most interesting aspect of that game, outside of course, we'll talk about the Eagles defense just utterly dominating with basically 4 guys and pressuring Mahomes through quarter and cover 6 coverage and making sure that nothing went deep. But Spagnuolo, I actually thought, this is the part that no one's really talking about, I thought he did a good job. The Eagles' offense was just good enough the entire time. Not great, just good enough to get by until that final death nail in the coffin where Hurts strikes a 46-yard touchdown throw to Devonta Smith, who goes up for a contested catch and comes down with it in the end zone. And to that point, though, there's a reason why everyone, wherever they were watching the game, was talking about Cooper DeJean, other defensive players perhaps being defensive MVP, Super Bowl MVP of the game as a defensive player, because the offense wasn't too great for Philadelphia. It's just their defense put the stranglehold on Mahomes and Andy Reid's play calling. And so I thought personally Spagnuolo did do a very good job, but again, it just came down to it being at least for the offense, just needing to buy time, keep the ball away from Mahomes, and then, of course, when they got the ball back because their defense did all the work, eventually the Philadelphia's offense came through with a couple of bigger plays they needed to really run away with it, especially in the second half. But that's how we start with the Saquon Barkley longest run, losing that one.
Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting aspects there.
Yeah.
The thing that's so interesting, and this is really good timing this week, John, because I actually did the Greg Cosell episode of the Ross Tucker Football Podcast early this week. We did it on Wednesday. I didn't want to wait till tomorrow. Tomorrow, actually, we'll have interviews with Puka Nacua as well as Keegan-Michael Key, which will be a lot of fun on tomorrow's Ross Tucker Football Podcast. I noticed this watching the game. Now, my seats were way up high. I'll say this, though. Those are not bad seats, especially in a dome.
No.
In a dome where it goes straight up, I don't mind that. All stadiums, for whatever reason, go out more as you go up. In a dome, it just goes straight up. I loved it. I felt like I was watching the All-22 the whole time, and I was in the corner of the end zone, so I was almost getting like a combo All-22 high end zone look. You know, they had a lot of two deep safeties, did the Chiefs, and then Spagnuolo, right at the snap, would have the safety insert, and that's why Saquon was only getting 2 or 3 yards. It was a genius game plan, I thought, to stop the run, where you're not stacking the box to the point. So let me just explain this, John. If you stack the box, right? If you have a single deep safety and you bring the other safety down, the O-line knows where that guy is and can all push to that guy. You can make him the new Will linebacker, the new Mike linebacker, or whatever, and you leave the last guy. If that safety comes down at the snap of the ball or late, you don't account for him. You can't account for him. You don't know which one's coming down late. And so those guys made a zillion tackles. I mean, Reed and the other guy, they made a zillion tackles on Saquon because a lot of times they were the unblocked guy. Right where he felt like he had room, bam, they were there. So that was actually really well done by Spagnuolo. Much better done, quite frankly, than stopping Hurts from running. They had a spy a few times. The thing about having a spy is if your spy doesn't get him, you're screwed because you're counting on your spy to be able to get Hurts, who was very decisive and effective as a runner. I mean, obviously he played awesome. Keep going. Sorry, John.
No, I enjoy listening to you from that aspect because a lot of people don't know that's where the scouts sit, is that area of the dome in the field, because that's how you get your all-22 tape. So I've been at games in those same seats, and I think they're incredible seats, the upper area, because then also you're not really looking at the Titantron because you're seeing more than the replay is going to show you anyhow. But that was the first L we took, although again, we did compensate at plus 650. The other two, the first one that I wasn't shocked about, the way the game was going in the mid-third quarter, we took DeAndre Hopkins under 16.5 receiving yards, and the process was absolutely correct. He only got there on the final garbage time drive with that touchdown. Otherwise, though, we discussed how throughout the playoffs, for whatever reason, he just had not integrated into the offense the way they had hoped, similar to Amari Cooper with Buffalo post-trade deadline at all. And he was being used as their fourth receiver behind Juju Smith-Schuster. And so 16.5 seemed like a pretty safe number. Again, he ultimately gets there, goes over that prop, unfortunately, on the last drive. The one, though, I was most shocked about is that, to that point, Dallas Goedert had been an integral part of Philly's passing attack. And perhaps it was because they played more keep away in the first half, running it on early downs in order to kill the clock and keep the ball out of Mahomes' hands. But Philadelphia's offense in this game did not run through Goddard at all. Just 2 catches for 27 yards. His prop was at 49.5. By the time I looked by kickoff, it had increased at DraftKings Sportsbook all the way to 51.5. That was the one outside of Hurts touchdowns I was the most or second most confident about. And Goddard just ultimately did not get there for us.
No, he didn't. But you know what always gets there for me? Labatt Blue Light. Love drinking Labatt Blue Lights with friends and living life to the power of we. I know a lot of people will be drinking those this weekend during the Eagles Super Bowl parade on Friday. Always enjoy responsibly. Beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. What's next, John?
Let's get to some of the big winners that we were most confident in outside of the Hurts touchdown. And that is, for starters, Xavier Worthy. We said the way to attack it was over his 68.5 rushing and receiving yards combined. And the receiving is what ultimately got him there, especially with that long strike, that second touchdown he had in garbage time. But Xavier Worthy, no issues getting there, because that is how the offense really, the only times they served explosive plays, the only times they got downfield was through Xavier Worthy, who put together a tremendous second half of the season as a first-round rookie.
You know what? I got to tell you, they were trying to run the offense through him.
Yep.
I mean, I think, and I know, over the next few weeks, we'll do a season recap, lessons learned from the fantasy season that was. Obviously, we got to dive, John, into all the coaching news because that's huge. But one of my big takeaways, boy, that was a good pick, Xavier Worthy. I mean, he looks to me like he will be, I don't know what else they'll do, but he's like their number one skill guy already. I mean, they decided over the last few weeks that not DeAndre Hopkins, not Travis Kelce, not either running back, not Hollywood Brown, Andy Reid and the Chiefs coaching staff basically decided that Xavier Worthy was their go-to guy, which I think is fascinating because that was not his rep coming out of Texas. That was not what people thought he would do this first year. I think the thought was he would just be a speed deep threat this first year. He has a chance to really have a special season next year.
And we'll see what the recovery and development of Rashee Rice is over the offseason. But remember, Rice proved he could be a top-end wide receiver, especially from Patrick Mahomes, and was earning targets ahead of Travis Kelce prior to his torn ACL. And so perhaps we see that Worthy and Rice give Mahomes next year, especially in the latter half of the season, the best core of receivers that he's had in his entire career. So I'm very excited to see the development between those two. For some of our other winning bets, we go to the Chiefs running game and talked about how we don't expect them to do anything against the Eagles because all playoffs long, all season long, the Eagles had not only been one of the best defenses in the entire league, but in particular, they never leaked anything to opposing running games, and Isaiah Pacheco was still very clearly injured and brought back very early. And in that game, of course, didn't try to run the ball with either of them, Pacheco or Kareem Hunt anyhow, but of course, 3 carries for 7 yards. Pacheco goes under every single rushing prop imaginable. We took under 22.5 rushing yards, and the game got out of hand anyhow in the first quarter to the point where the Chiefs wouldn't run the ball. Thus, we were very confident about that prop in the second half as well.
Was talking with you guys about Smirnoff all season as the official sponsor of the Ross Tucker Football Podcast and an official vodka partner of the NFL and Super Bowl 59. I love that at Smirnoff you can get the world's #1 vodka without breaking the bank. I call that Smirnoff Extraordinary. I don't call it that. They call it that, but I go with it because I think it's actually funny in that commercial. They still got those drops with the Smirnoff Extraordinary items, SmirnoffDrops.com. Please drink responsibly. Smirnoff number 21 vodka, distilled from grain, 40% alcohol by volume. The Smirnoff Company, New York, New York. Pricing is at the sole discretion of the retailer and may vary by state. Please do not share with anyone under legal drinking age. Smirnoff, We do game days. Yeah, man. I mean, that was interesting because I thought the first drive of the second half, when they got the ball to start the second half, they ran it 2 or 3 times in the first 3 or 4
weird.
plays. They had some success. And, first of all, Andy Reid, that's not what he wants to do. But then secondly, they ultimately punted. I can't remember what happened. And then the Eagles had like an 8-minute drive or a 9-minute drive. And I think they ended with a field goal, maybe 27-0. So then by the time the Chiefs got the ball the next time, there was only like 4 minutes left in the third quarter. They were down by 4 possessions. I think Andy Reid was like, well, now we can't run it. So that was going to be his adjustment was we're down 3 scores. We got to run them out of these 2 deep safety looks because Fangio was primarily 2 deep safety looks, whether it was quarters coverage or cover 6, cover 8, whatever. And but then by the time they got the ball back, they couldn't run it anymore. It was over.
That was my assessment as well as I was watching the game with friends, is the fact they came out, as you said, the Chiefs running the ball twice in a row, but then they lost yardage on second down to make it 3rd and long and already put themselves in a losing situation when they got the ball back at what was pretty much the game, trying to decide the game at that time. It was crazy. I do wonder what the Chiefs will do this offseason, if they will look to add maybe some more explosiveness. Obviously, coming out of this game, I would imagine offensive line will continue to be their priority in front of Patrick Mahomes. And then the final one that we took down was Juju Smith-Schuster, longest catch, over 9.5 yards. In the first quarter, he had an 11-yard catch. We got that one out of the way early, and as we talked about, that's because he was their primary slot receiver. DeAndre Hopkins does not play there, and they use Xavier Worthy in such a creative, chess-like way, is that Worthy's not really a slot receiver. He's used all over the field, thus they keep Juju out there practically permanently. So Juju Smith-Schuster also got there in what was otherwise a lackluster passing game.
Yeah, it really was. I got to tell you, John, I think that's the worst I've ever seen Mahomes play. I mean, and give the Eagles credit a lot, and the offensive line struggled, but he looked confused. He looked lost. He couldn't really scramble. And then the 2 picks were bad. I mean, they were bad. There's no other way. It's not like they were like, oh, tipped or whatever. They were not good. I know you in particular had some thoughts, John, about Howie Roseman and sort of what he was able to do to get this team to this point.
The Eagles are a success story that I hope future GMs look into, about how Howie Roseman has navigated and maneuvered each draft in order to get to this point and build what we called last week the Super Bowl that was the best quarterback in Mahomes versus the best roster in Philadelphia. Because think about it like this. Philadelphia obviously took Carson Wentz at number 2 overall in the 2016 draft. And from 2017 on, the following year, have appeared in 3 Super Bowls in that time. And Wentz didn't start any of the 3. That's how good that roster was. The fact that they basically didn't need the quarterback they invested heavily in because of Nick Foles, and then, of course, the last 2 times they appeared in the Super Bowls, Jalen Hurts, the otherwise considered backup option to Foles in that time. It's not only that, but then they take that number 2 overall pick in the 2016 draft in Carson Wentz, and they flip him over the years into picks that ultimately become Devonta Smith, A.J. Brown from the Titans, Jordan Davis, and Jalen Carter. Then they head into this past offseason, and despite having those heavy picks in the trenches, both offensive line, as we know, they've stacked 6 or 7 offensive linemen over the time, basically preparing for Jason Kelsey's retirement, but also getting ahead of the Landon Dickerson eventual move as well. And then go into this offseason and say, okay, we are continuing to add to our defense with the number 22 overall pick, Kenyon Mitchell, who was one of the league's best corners, not just rookie, best cornerbacks overall when he was available. And of course, Cooper DeJean, who got healthy over the second half of the season when he returned after the bye, and then had the big pick 6 of Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl. That's what Howie Roseman has done. And that's how he ultimately built this roster that is not just winning a Super Bowl in 2025, but prepared to compete for one for the next 5 odd years, assuming he handles the contracts correctly. And so I think that's the real success story here is, yes, amazing, amazing players, but they're also young and they're all stacked on the same team for the same reason. And that's because of how Howie Roseman has built this team from the ground up.
Well, the last thing I would worry about if I'm an Eagles fan is the contract part of it, because I do think he's the best in the league pretty clearly at contracts and I would say trades. And what's scary is that his recent drafts have been very, very good. I mean, you look at them, right? And I talked about this on the Ross Report this morning, which is a social media thing I do at Ross Tucker NFL, talking about the Eagles. Their whole offense is under contract next year, except for Mekhi Becton, right? So just to put that in perspective, okay? They just won the Super Bowl by however many points. They have the number one offensive line, number one running back, a top 5 tight end, arguably the number one wide receiver duo, and a Super Bowl MVP quarterback, all back, except for Becton at right guard, who my guess is somebody will give him a lot of money elsewhere, but Tyler Steen played a bunch for them. They drafted him high in the 3rd round a couple years ago. He will fill in, I would imagine, at right guard and play fine. Maybe not quite as well as Becton, but he'll play fine. It's remarkable. And the other thing, John, this is off the top of my head, but A.J. Brown, years he's under contract. Devontae Smith, years, plural. Mailata, years. Dickerson, years. Juergens only has 1 more year. I bet you they get that done this offseason. Lane, years. Goddard, I think 25 is his last one. Hurts, years. Barkley, years. So most of those guys are actually under contract at least through 26, which is really just remarkable when you think about it. They do have a couple more guys on defense with Milton Williams, Zach Bond, and Josh Sweat. But they had some young guys, Moro Ajama and Jalix Hunt, that made some plays too that are kind of there if they need them. You made a great point, I would say, about the Carson Wentz pick, to think that they invest all of that in a guy at 2016 and then go to 3 Super Bowls after that and he doesn't play in any of them. That is remarkable. And kudos to them for realizing when he was a sunk cost. I remember specifically, John, I was doing the draft show. It was COVID. I was right here. This is where I was doing the draft show live for the Eagles, okay? And they say in my ear, 2nd round pick, the Eagles have selected Jalen Hurts. And within 10 seconds, they say, Ross, what do you think? And I couldn't believe it. I was like, well, the Eagles are always going to make sure that, they are covered at the backup quarterback position. And, they highly value it. And this way they can save money at backup quarterback. Like, it was like, in my mind, I was thinking, what are they doing? And it worked out perfectly.
I think it is never the incorrect answer to always invest in the 3 positions we talked about, quarterback specifically, but also offensive line and defensive line. And this is a defensive line, mind you, that Vic Fangio and that unit only blitzed Patrick Mahomes twice all game and not once in the first half. And yet they come away with 6 sacks and keep him under duress the entire time, pressure him on 40% of his dropbacks in that game. Again, without sending any extra pass rushers. They said, we have the 4 guys and we have the rotation that we invested in, how we invested in throughout these drafts, and we'll just run them at you. If Josh Sweat, Nolan Smith, they both come away with at least 2 sacks and 4 pressures, they just put all their menaces together. And it is funny how in the drafts, like, yes, all the credit in the world goes to Roseman and that organization, but they have become the Ravens in that it's as if the best players in the draft happen to fall to Philadelphia every single time. Like, everyone knew Jalen Carter was arguably worthy of the number 1 overall pick, and he scoots all the way back to nearly the back end of the first half of that first round. Eagles to say, of course, that's a number 1 overall caliber player. We have to move up and we have to get him. And it didn't even take much. Not to mention last year with the Cooper DeJean, everyone knew he was arguably the best DB or nickel in the draft. He at least couldn't make the case he was that. And yet because of, I believe, the red flags for his injury, that's why he scooted back into the second round. And it was, of course, the Eagles who take advantage of it despite taking Kenyon Mitchell in the first round. You can always cover up, your weaknesses with multiple picks. And I think everyone forgets that. Similar to playing fantasy and how everyone instead targets to fill their starting lineup as opposed to stacking the best players. It's okay to go 4 running backs. It's okay to go 4 wide receivers if they're the best players, and that fits the strategy. And I think Roseman just exudes that in terms of NFL roster building.
Yeah, so just cleaning up a little bit, they did trade up 1 spot to get Jalen Carter from whatever it was, 10 to 9. But your point's well taken. He was the best player in the draft, and he didn't go because of the off-the-field stuff. DeJean, they also switched with the Commanders, and they went up to get Cooper DeJean a few picks, and Samuelson dropped. The Quinyon Mitchell one's crazy. Yeah. Maybe that's Toledo. Maybe it's because he's offensive-heavy draft. But to get a top 10 corner, arguably already, with the 24th pick as a rookie, that just doesn't happen. You got to check this man out on social media, at @NotJDaigle. He is awesome. I'm at Ross Tucker NFL. We are at Ross Tucker Pod. I'm stuffed. We're done.
Thanks for tuning in to Fantasy Feast. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and College Draft, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcasts on your favorite platform.